right, so Dana, let's get down to some real world examples here. So we got a message from somebody who once opened up a coffee shop. I think they're going to call it Planet 9. And they want to find out, how do I protect that name? Is it available? Where do we begin?
This is where every entrepreneur begins. And unfortunately, sometimes they're getting ahead of themselves. Where you begin isn't by saying, I have a trademark, I want to protect it. It's by asking, does somebody else have prior trademark rights that I might infringe if I adopt this name? Am I going to open a coffee house and have someone come along and say, you need to change your name? That's the first question that they need to ask.
Okay.
Once we've determined that, then we move on to the question of how can I protect it and to what extent?
So let me ask you, what do I do then? What does this entrepreneur do to make sure they don't infringe on somebody else's rights?
That's a great question. As a trademark lawyer, large companies will pay me to do this kind of due diligence for them. I search, I pay for an outside analyst to provide a large report. It's a very expensive process, and most entrepreneurs should not be spending $4,000 on me to clear their trademark. Instead, what they ought to be doing is learning about trademarks and then doing their own due diligence. So there are two types of trademark users that they need to be worried about. One of them are trademark users that have registrations. Those are fairly easy to find because there is a trademark database, as we've discussed, and they can search for prior trademark registrants. But there are also users of trademarks. Trademark rights, again, arise from use of a name. Therefore, if you're going to adopt a name, you need to say, are there users of this name that I need to be concerned about? And you do that, frankly, by searching Google. You want to find out who might have used this name. For example, our question from one of our users, Planet 9. They would go to Google and search Planet 9, or maybe Planet 9 Coffee House, or Planet 9 Restaurant. And they would determine, are there prior users that have earlier trademark rights than me?
So do I have this straight? The registrants, to find registrants, I might go to USPTO, and to find prior use, I would do a Google search?
Sure. Google, Yahoo, Bing, do search engines, and try and determine, is there somebody out there that's been using this name that has prior rights who might come along and tell me that their rights are superior to mine and tell me to stop.
And so if they don't find any potential issues, what is the next step?
The next step is going to be to determine if the trademark is registrable.
So Dana, let's say you find someone with prior use of a similar mark, then what?
All right, so you can hire a lawyer, of course. But again, what I'm trying to do here is empower entrepreneurs to make some decisions on their own.
Right.
So what they need to understand is that a prior user is a problem if there's a likelihood of confusion. Well, the likelihood of confusion is a legal technical term. But there are some elements, as actually a law that in each jurisdiction that tells us what a likelihood of confusion is.
And those would be?
In our circuit, in the Ninth Circuit, California and most of the Western states, the test is as follows. What we do is compare the two marks, and we ask a series of questions to analyze the two marks. Mm-hmm. We evaluate the strength of the marks. Are these marks strong? We look at the proximity of the goods or the services. Are they sold in similar places? We look at the similarity of the marks themselves. Are these marks exactly the same, or do they just use one dominant element that's the same? We look at whether there's evidence of actual confusion. Now, this is unlikely if an entrepreneur has just started using a name. It's unlikely that we'll have actual confusion, but it's an element that the courts will evaluate. We look at the marketing channels for the two brands. Do these marketing channels cross over? For example, you might have somebody who sells a particular kind of apparel, such as uniforms, and somebody who sells clothing, and we might determine that although both are clothing, they're sold in different marketing channels and therefore maybe not likely to be confused.
Sure.
We evaluate the type of goods and the degree of purchaser care. Well, the degree of purchaser care goes up with costs. So if it's an expensive good, then purchasers are going to be more careful and therefore more aware of the particular brand and not likely to be confused as easily. We also look at the defendant's intent in adopting the mark. So if you're an entrepreneur and you're choosing a trademark on purpose to be similar to a prior trademark, the courts won't look kindly on that. And finally, we look at the likelihood of expansion of the product lines. So are these types of goods or services likely to expand into each other? For example, A restaurant and a bar might be likely to be confused because each might expand into the other. Bars often serve food and restaurants often open bars. The list isn't exhaustive, but this is an example of most of the factors that the courts apply when evaluating whether there's a likelihood of confusion. So for the entrepreneur, they actually have to take a little bit of time to compare any trademark that they find that's a lot like theirs and use that short list and ask those questions. And if in good faith they believe it's not likely to be confused after evaluating those factors, then they've diminished their risk.
And they can move forward.
They could move forward. There's always the risk that someone may disagree with their position.
Sure.
Even if I render an opinion as a lawyer, there's always the risk that somebody on the other side disagrees and says, even though I've told the client I don't believe that there's a likelihood of confusion, there's always the risk that somebody disagrees and believes there is. And there's always the risk that someone comes along that doesn't have rights to assert and tries to bully you. You never completely eliminate risk, but you can diminish risk by evaluating the prior users of trademarks through the matrix of the likelihood of confusion test.
Asking all those questions
Ask
of yourself.
those questions, absolutely.
Yeah. All right, so entrepreneurs are known for being creative. So if it was me, I would look at that and say, Planet 9, you know, that's already taken. I won't use it, but maybe I'll call my business Pluto. Is there a problem with that? Am I infringing anywhere?
It's a great question.
It's the 9th planet?
It is the 9th planet. It was the 9th planet, we should say.
Not a planet, really.
It's been disqualified in our lifetime.
Right.
The answer is no. That typically, when you're evaluating trademarks, you actually are looking for whether the words themselves are likely to be confused. So having something that means the same thing, for example, Planet 9 and Pluto, is, in my experience, unlikely to ever give rise to infringement.
Still pretty safe.
Still pretty safe. There is a rule that foreign language words must be translated into English.
What do you mean by that?
Well, if you're adopting the word planet in French, I don't know what planet is in French.
I don't either.
But if you had a French word for planet 9, you would have to choose, translate it, and then the trademark office would apply the likelihood of confusion test.
Again, that would be the entrepreneur trying to take advantage of by using a foreign language word in there.
True.
That's not going to fly.
It's generally not going to fly. It really depends on whether consumers are likely to know what the translated word means.
Sure.
And with most common foreign languages, they'll assume that people will know what it means, and that can give rise to likelihood of confusion. So simply choosing a foreign language word for the mark you'd like doesn't always get around someone else's prior trademark rights.